I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Joanna Fortune, a psychoanalytic psychotherapist specializing in the parent-child relationship. She's the author of the series of books, 15-Minute Parenting, and has her own podcast, as well as a TED Talk, an ongoing column in the Irish Times, and a radio show. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. As many of you know, Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Trapart Books, 2019. There are only a couple Rendering Unconscious books left available. They are the hardback bound book. They are signed by me, and there's literally like 2 or 3 left at Trapart headquarters, and then they are sold out. So we have them on clearance sale currently for $12. Visit trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. Another way you can support the podcast is by joining our Patreon. My husband Carl and I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. That's VANESSA 23CARL. And it would be great to see more of you there. Right now, Rendering Unconscious podcast has over 80,000 listens, but we've only had the same kind of handful of patrons for a long time now, and most of them are actually from my husband's career, from his photography, his music, his art, and his writing. There's probably only 5 or 6 people there from the podcast, so it'd be great to see some of you there. We have a $2 level and up, and you can even pay for the whole year at once now, so it's like $21 for the year, and it would really help out because I do spend basically a whole work day every week putting the podcast together. So thanks so much for supporting. I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I hope to see you all at Patreon soon.
Gosh, how did we even come across each other? I was following your work, actually, Vanessa. You know, your beautiful cut-up poetry. I'm a big fan of that work. And your book, and I have framed one of your pieces on my wall, actually. So I feel like I have that sense of insight into you through your work, which is how I think I made first contact with you online.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad because that book, to me, it's so special because it's my first published book, and there's so few left. I think the regular edition's totally sold out, and there's only like 2 left of the ones with the print or
I'm not
something like
surprised.
that.
It's really special. And and it really inspired me. I started doing my own cut up poetry, but I will admit mine looks a little bit more like a kidnap note with just cut out newspaper things stuck together. So I don't have quite the finesse, but I enjoy the process, the catharsis of putting it together, cutting and re-putting together very much.
Yeah, it's all about the process. I love that
I
you're doing
agree.
cut-ups.
Oh yeah, and from the newspaper, little random little phrases or words, especially things that recur in newspapers at the moment, which I think is what we're going through, is that there is a repetition. And there's something that of course, as psychoanalyst, that's very striking about any repetitions. And so I've been cutting out the phrases and words that I see repeated over a week, and I'll take those and say, okay,
Ooh.
there's something there. And so repetition is maybe my theme in mind when I'm doing it. And I have a little box, and I put all the words in, and my little Pritt stick and everything like that, and a notebook. And I just enjoy it. Yeah, it gets me out of my head and sort of down into those now moments in the body. I really enjoy it.
I love it. I love that you're doing that. That's amazing. I think that idea exactly, like something that's repeated over and over again in the news like that, must be so potent and powerful, and to cut those out and work with them. It has so much charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, just to kind of break down what is being repeated, because otherwise it can feel like we're being bombarded. And actually, when you take a step back and go, well, when something is repeated and repeated and repeated, what is it we're not hearing the first, second, and third time? And if we put it all together, is there some other meaning, making meaning really in all of that? So I enjoy thinking about it that way, actually.
Yeah, and it's like a literal and tangible way to like be processing the news.
Yeah.
It's
Which I
amazing.
think is the only way to process the news at the moment. And in the recent past, it's just been so overwhelming.
Yeah, that's great. Yesterday was actually Burroughs' birthday. And so I tried to make some cut-ups with him in mind, even though he's kind of always in mind. And that's what happened. That's how I started making them all the time is I got a new apartment in New York and I always like to like sage the house, like kind of clean it out before I move into a new place, you know, that someone else has lived in before.
Yeah.
And I didn't kind of have my usual accoutrements because I just went by like after work one day and I was like, well, how am I going to kind of make this apartment mine? I had a paper that I had written and I decided to cut it up and like sit there with a candle and just do cut ups in the apartment. And then I just became obsessed with them and I started doing
That's
them like every day
amazing.
after that.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, and it gives me ideas actually about, when you were saying you had a paper you'd written, all the drafts of writing books. And, I'm doing a doctorate as well, and, have drafted and redrafted and redrafted, talking about repetition again and what gets recreated in the repeating. But actually going back and extracting little pieces of that could be a really nice way of knitting that process together with an unspoken narrative, because the process of drafting and redrafting when you're writing something can feel draining, but actually there is a creativity inherent within that as well.
Absolutely. And this book that I just had come out in November, Scansion and Psychoanalysis and Art, which just kind of talks about the cut up process. That's what I did when I had kind of the final edit, not before I sent it to them. I decided to print out each chapter and like take a couple pages from each chapter and cut
Yeah.
them up and like cut the chapters together, like one just chapter one cut up, just chapter two, just chapter three, and then once I did like a kind of a cut up for each chapter, then I mixed together like the leftovers and like made a cut up of the book. It was really fun.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I love that. Now you see, I'm getting all ideas. I knew that would happen as soon as I talked to you. I'm like, ooh, yeah, little light bulb moments going, oh, yes, I could do this and this and this. So, but it's great. It's great because I find, at the frenetic pace of the world of life at the moment. And, when you mix that kind of fast pace, frenetic demand of work, but with this insular way we're all living, that our physical space has gotten smaller as we stay in and retreat. I think that's very evocative, of so much in each of us. And it can be hard to find a creative expression to release some of that because we're so in the just do it, just do it, just keep going, that we can lose that opportunity for process. So maybe it's no coincidence that that's where we started talking today, was about process and repetition. Um, it's, I think the world has gotten smaller, and at a time when culturally our world is supposed to be bigger, and we're all connected with each other, in like you and I are speaking in different parts of the world today through the medium of technology. But I think we have to process the experience of contraction, that kind of restricted movement that we're all enduring, I would say, at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's like at the same time we're all connected like never before globally, but we're
Yeah,
all like stuck inside of our houses. So we're like at the same time
totally.
connected and totally isolated.
Oh, no, absolutely. And trying to make those spaces feel fresh and new, even within, I was doing something this morning before talking with you, and I decided I would use a different corner of my office is not that big, at home, but I would use a different corner. So it would have a different feel. And so I brought up, the ironing board from downstairs so that I could position the laptop and the camera at the right level, but make it look like, oh, she's somewhere new today while doing it, and trying to create space within space. Like, I do think we're more creative than we give ourselves credit for, but I sometimes think that's coming from this need to adapt to the environment that we're in.
Yeah, no, I absolutely have my whole apartment cut up into like little, like, this is where I exercise now, and here's my desk, and here's
Yeah,
my analytic
yeah.
chair. Like, it's like all these tiny sections of the house.
I think that's it, and I think that the nature of how we live, but also, the nature of how we work as analysts in whatever way we are working analytically, and whatever mediums we're using. At the moment, it's been a huge call on us to change and to adapt. And I'm not sure that's always very easy for us analysts, actually. I think we learn a way of doing things and we hold tight to, this is the modality I work within, this is what I subscribe to, and this is how I work. And actually, in this kind of pandemic time has really, not to say it's been a positive, but to make a positive of a negative, is it has really called upon all of us to dig deep and see, can we adapt, and what does that adaptation produce in each of us. And I think it's been really, for me, it's been really interesting, but I think in general, speaking with colleagues, it's been an interesting process.
Oh, absolutely. The analytic colleagues. I've been working this way already since I moved from the US to Sweden. I was already working remotely, but all of
Yeah.
a sudden everybody had to switch and like all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden see all of their analyses remotely. And there were all these kind of process groups, and people were having like talks about it in the beginning, which was almost a year ago now.
Yeah.
And it was really a huge adjustment for everybody, understandably.
Oh, I think absolutely, because when we have to adapt to anything, we have to give something up, and that's never easy, especially when it's not something that you consciously choose and say, I've been thinking about this and it's time that I adapt. Here's what I'm going to do, but it's thrust upon us. And it initially had this feel of, I don't really need to adapt because this is only going to be 6, 8 weeks and we'll all be fine. But now that we're a year on, that need to adapt, to change, to evolve, to grow within what we do is huge, and it's unavoidable, actually. I think that's really interesting. The analyst Biche Bienvenute speaks about mutation in her work. I took a seminar with her during the pandemic, actually, just before Christmas, and she spoke about mutation in therapy. And sorry, let me just make sure that my other noisy gadgets around me are turned off. And in speaking about the mutation, she was really talking about, what we need to do to change and adapt as analysts, as therapists, and that it isn't okay just to kind of say, this is our one way that we're stuck in doing of things. But when you invite the mutation in, what potential and possibility can come out of it. And that really stayed with me. I think it's relevant in any time, but I think it's extremely relevant now, that idea of a mutation and what it can provoke.
Absolutely. I love that. Will you say more about her?
Yeah, I mean, she's so interesting. So if you haven't heard her speak, definitely try to do that. She's so interesting. She talks, the seminar I was taking with her, she was talking about child psychoanalysis, but from the position of, a question/statement, isn't analysis always child analysis?
Oh, yeah.
And really looking at how psychoanalysis is based on and deduced from a child's sensual or libidinal history, and that's inherent in all of us. I thought she was really interesting on all of that, and spoke a bit about autism as well, I think, if I remember. But for me, the piece that really resonated was the mutation, because part of what I do in my work, the main thrust of my work, is about play. And play is a state of mind, a way of being, not the content of playing, as Winnicott might say, but the act of playing, that really intrigues me. And I think, what I gleaned, and this is very much my interpretation of Biche's statements and work, but that, when we work with children, we as analysts, we have to change how we work, right? We have to lean in, we have to come off the couch, so to speak, and we play, and we play to provoke something, and we use play as a language in that setting, and that in itself is a mutation to the psychoanalytic process. And I would frame that within, say, a lot of what Winnicott would write about in his famous case study, the Piggle. But I'm a Lacanian by my core training. I'm not a purist. I say that openly because there will be lots of people going, oh, she's not a pure Lacanian. I'm definitely not. I've done many trainings. I think I've probably mutated many times over the course of my career. But, she tied it as well to Lacan's The Direction of the Treatment and how to act with one's being. And I think that's really relevant in the times we live in. So I think the benefit in these pandemic times is seminars, webinars, learning has become so accessible, it's almost overwhelming. You know, I think I did enough CPD in a year to last me 5 years, because suddenly I was like, oh my goodness, I don't have to go to London or New York or wherever to do this. I can do this from my office at home. And, you know, it was almost like, give it all to me, give it all, I want it all. And then I was like, no, I'm exhausted from learning. But some certain things I have resonated with me. And I think Beaches was one. She's a very interesting speaker and engaging as well. You know, so I think that's really interesting. But, you know, I think that children, you know, don't need endless analysis. And I think that's also part of a process of mutation. And I was really interested to hear her thoughts on that.
Was that through the Freud Lacan Institute?
Yes. Yes, it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
I'm so glad that started.
Oh, me too. Excellent, excellent seminars.
Absolutely. I've been loving them, and I've been loving all the Freud Museum talks
Yeah.
and everything like that. And now this group, there's a Lacanian group in New York called Après Coup, and they used to do their classes like at 6:30 p.m. on Fridays, but now they've shifted things to like 10 a.m. on Saturdays in New York. So it's like 4
Oh.
p.m. here. So it's actually something that's accessible now, which has been great. So I've done a
Oh,
few of
that's
those as
amazing.
well.
Oh, I must look at that too. And actually, I did an amazing seminar with the Freud Museum on Freud and fairy tales before Christmas. And it was just so rich. You know, it was a full day, really intense now, but so interesting and so rich, and looking at it through the uncanny and things like that. And I love fairy tales. I love, you know, the darkness. I love the idea of the forest. I love all of those symbolic pieces. So that was lovely. So I find I'm trying to choose online learnings at the moment that are fun and pleasurable. Yes, there's learning, but that's almost the secondary piece. I'm like, oh, I'd love to spend a day talking about fairy tales. Oh, by the way, it's going to be underpinned by this theoretical flow. Great, fine, but that's not my primary motivation. And then some others where I'm like, I really want to learn more about this particular thing. But learning is something that has opened up in this pandemic, I think, which is interesting because, you know, in the context of parents trying to support home-based learning and support children learning at home, it has felt extremely trying and pressure-filled. But I think that the learning that's been opened up, generally speaking, to us professionally as analysts, but as people, has been immense.
Yeah, I did the same thing that you kind of described where I got so excited about it. I like signed up for too many things
Yeah,
and I was just learning all of the time, which was really good in the beginning. It kept me really
totally.
busy. I also started scheduling like 2 podcasts a week. And then that's all I did basically was like listen to lectures and edit podcasts. And then by like October, November, I was like, I need to take a little time off and like
Yeah,
reassess my speed at which I am doing these things and maybe pace
yeah.
myself a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And I found inadvertently between the learning, the working, and the overdosing on courses, that by Christmas time, I, you know, afforded myself a 4 week break because I was just done. I was done. And a bit like you, because I do, you know, radio every week, I do a podcast, I do, you know, I've all of these pieces that are around my work, which keeps creativity a part of my work, and that's really important to me. But it's also, as you know, a huge commitment. Once you say, oh, I'm going to do a podcast, now you're doing a podcast and you got to put out content every week. You know, you can't just say, I'm going to do a podcast and, you know, there's 4 amazing episodes and I am done with that. That's not the way it works. So the content is a constant demand in itself. So keeping that going and, you know, the parts of our brain that stimulates, as well as the work and everything that goes with that. And oh, by the way, I better keep learning things. You know, we're pulling ourselves in so many different directions at once at the moment that I'm not surprised we're tired. I also think the demand within our area of work has just surged. You know, the demand for analysis, for therapy has increased so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, will you talk a little bit about working with children? And you have this like parenting column in the paper, and like I haven't really had any guests, I'm realizing, speaking with you that have worked specifically with children and talked about parenting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so yes, exactly. I work with children, adolescents, and I do a lot of therapeutic parenting using like mentalization and processes like that with parents to deepen their insight into their non-parent selves. But actually, it's this I take it through a very intergenerational lens of how we experienced being parented and how that influences, far from books or schools of parenting we might subscribe to, that what pops out our mouths in those heightened moments when our attachment systems are activated, when we flip our emotional lids, is not what we read in a lovely book, but it's what we lived being parented. And if we don't go inwards to parent outwards, we're missing a key part of the story. And in my practice, what I had often found was a child was being presented, to the child analyst. This child has a problem. Please fix problem, return child to me. Thank you. And, thinking, oh, okay, we could do that for sure. And for lots of young people and children, that's a very effective process. And for others, and a significant amount of others, I might have them for the analytic hour a week. But there are many hours in the week. And, finding a little bit like, we were having this session and the child would leave and they would come back. And I'm like, oh, we're having the same session, and they would leave and they would come back. And I'm going, okay, so what is being played out here? And so I moved to do quite a bit of dyadic work and bringing the relationship into the analyst space. That is the parent-child relationship. So the parent isn't, say, my client, the child isn't the client, but their relationship is what we focus on. And working in that dyadic way really produced, and again, I'm back to that word mutation. While it's a change, it was a change to provoke something. And I found it a very provocative way of working, in a very healthy way, in bringing something into the room that we could go, okay, what's this? Let's think about this, and to do it together and using play. So I love play anyway, but I love play with a purpose, and I think play has a purpose. I think it's super important in all of our lives. I think in Western culture we really assign play to the realm of childhood, and we say, well, that's for children, that's what they do. And us grown-ups, we're serious and responsible, and we couldn't be doing that play stuff. And actually, I think that's the mistake we make, is that we stop playing. And we tend to stop playing with our children in modern society quite young. We, by middle childhood, 9, 10, 11 years old, we see that they play, themselves. They do structured play like scooters and bikes and skates and those kinds of things, and gaming, and we leave them at it. And we play with our little children, and we don't play at all then with our teenagers. And that's when our relationships become under more pressure. So I would see that playfulness and a bid to playfully connect is the essence of staying connected. That play fuels connection. Parenting is all about connection. But I would also think, Vanessa, we have to play as adults, and play without an intimate agenda, just play, be playful, laugh, have fun. And, I've, in some of the work I've done, I've seen colleagues do a cotton ball snowball fight using marshmallows in an elder person's home. And when you see a bunch of 80-year-olds throwing marshmallows at each other in a snowball fight, you say, yes, play is for life. And what that elicits, and that laughter will release residual tension we're holding. It just brings to mind for me, gosh, don't we all need to enter into a playful state of mind, maybe now more than ever. And, that's the purpose of my books. I've written a 3-book series. It's the name of my podcast, actually, 15-Minute Parenting. And much as I'd love to sit here and say, I've cracked it, all you need is 15 minutes a day and that's your parenting done. Really, it's about being predictable. It's about saying, if you only have 15 minutes a day in your busy day doing, to mindfully 100% no distractions devices sit and play with your child or children. That good enough, Winnicott again, good enough is good enough. But using that as every day, so that your child can anticipate with certainty that you will come and meet me at my level, in my language, in my world, and we will connect every day, that can be transformative in a relationship. And what I really wanted to do was explore, and this is the focus of the doctorate I'm doing, creating a therapeutic model that bridges the gap between the clinic room and the family home, so that parents, children who may not meet clinical threshold and come to you in the clinic, but for whom a small change could make a big difference, can avail of a therapeutic process that can be integrated into parenting. I'm really interested in that, in play with purpose and playful parenting, and not just, saying, well, here's a list of games, but, saying, here's some activities and here's why and here's how and here's what this is speaking to and when. And so that as a parent, I know, oh, this is a moment I need to sit and row the boat, or, oh, this is a moment I need to get the bubbles out, or it's time to blow up a balloon. And I know why I'm thinking that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I was just talking to some colleagues the other day about that, specifically a couple that were our marriage and family therapists, and they were talking about how hard it is in the States to get insurance to pay for like family
Yeah.
therapy unless there's some sort of like identified patient, like this child has this specific diagnosis, and then you could bring the family in. But just for like families that want to work on dynamics and create a healthier kind of way of being in interaction with each other and like better interpersonal relations, it's like it's not covered in there. And how
No,
frustrating that is, that things need to like be at this like critical threshold for them
exactly.
to be able to come in.
Yeah, and I think especially the American system when it comes to insurance and being tied to diagnosis and labels, and how much of a block that can be. And also I think that so many families that would benefit from even a short therapeutic intervention don't get to access that. And actually there are so many ways that you can bring that home with you. And I think that's really what I'm motivated by, is looking at ways that we can create a cultural change by increasing our capacity for playful engagement. If we think about what culture is, like, for me, culture is how we do things, how we dress, how we sing, how we dance. It's our culture. And, what's universal across culture is play. And actually, if we can, move that idea that play is the box of toys or play is the world of just children, and actually look for it as play enables flexibility. Play enables adaptability. Actually, play teaches us that we can and how to change the rules. Then you get to a place of going, why aren't we playing? Like, why aren't we playing every day? Why don't we look at ways to bring play into the corporate boardrooms and our communities and our societies and schools? Increase playfulness, get kids up from those desks and chairs and get them playing. The play is learning. But there's so much that we can create a new order out of play. And I think for me, that's exciting, but it's also very motivating to keep talking about it and to see how play relates to analysis, to see how play, and again, I'm back to that mutation thing, that it requires us to change and adapt in how we think and how we work, but that we can provoke something, we can provoke connection, we can make meaning, we can have that opportunity for shared joy. I think there's something about play that, in order for any of us to enjoy or draw pleasure from life, from the world, ourselves, other people, relationships, our very desire, we have to have experienced being enjoyed by our important others as we've grown and developed. That joy is a shared thing. It's not something I can do alone. And play is the catalyst for joy.
Oh, I love that. And I love also, like you pointed out, that it's creates this sense of kind of agency in the world as well, that
Yes.
we can play with things and change things. It's like you're able to kind of experiment in this kind of safe space, and then you can bring that out into the world and kind of work with things and play with things out there as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, we see evidence on social media of how, in this pandemic, there is that simmering playfulness that I'm going, oh, let's see what happens here. You know, it might start with banana bread every which way you can. And it may be, you know, starting your own sourdough kit, or, you know, little breeder and baking sourdoughs. But it could be crafting or knitting, or people are looking for things that they used to do. God, I used to love to do that. Maybe now is the time to do it. Or maybe I'll teach myself how to play the piano using YouTube tutorials. Or this is when I'm going to learn how to, whatever it is, that we're actually looking, you know, something in us is prompting us to get back to play. We know, I believe inherently, we all have a capacity to play. It's in us. For some of us, those play muscles are very stiff, haven't been worked out or exercised in quite a while, and we need quite a few squats and lunges to get us going, but it's in there. We can get back to it. And I think it's really important that we get back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of what we were talking about at the beginning with the cut-ups and the process of that,
Yeah.
because that's why I love cut-ups too, is because anybody can do it, and you can do it like, you don't have to have your own writing. You can just take the newspaper or whatever you have lying around and just start playing with that. You know, you don't have to have any like fine art skills to be able to work with it. You could just play with it and
Oh.
experiment with it anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, and it reminds me, I started going to, in my, just very close to where I live, with a friend of mine who is very gifted in art. I am not, but I very much enjoy the process. And we started going to an art class one evening a week, using acrylics. And, you know, she was lovely, precise, beautiful work. And I would just be going, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen on this and what's going to go, but I just loved doing it. Would I hang any of it up? You know, no. But it's absolutely, when I look at it, it enabled me to experience something, and that was my motivation. So I'm actually really drawn to art without ever considering myself talented in that area. That's not me being modest. That's me being really real about it, by the way. You know, I have talents. That is not one of them, but I am very drawn to it as a process. I'm very aware of that. Pottery, painting, you know, taking a canvas and acrylics, cutting up words and making new meaning out of other meaning, you know, restructuring and creating new order. I love all of that. I wish I had more time for it, and I really need to take some responsibility for that and make time for those things, because they are so good for me. I know that they're so good for me.
Yeah, and sometimes having it not be like something that you're invested in or a professional
Yeah,
at is very freeing, because you could just do
that's
it.
true.
Like when I make a painting, I just make it in one sitting. I could never like keep going back to a painting
No,
and
me
working
either.
on it over and over. That would like make me insane. So I just like to like get it out, make the thing, and then
Yeah.
it's done. And I'm like, great, that's my little painting. And it's like no pressure.
And I have to be what I'm thinking and feeling in the moment. And if I left that a week and came back to it, I'd be going, yeah, I'm not thinking or feeling that anymore.
Yeah,
That's done,
exactly. I
you know,
wouldn't
and it
even
would never get
recognize it.
finished. Yeah, yeah. So actually, I'm the same. I like to kind of move quick. It's done, move on, which is, of course, because the privilege of not being an artist or producing art for anything other than my own sense of process. And there we are, back to that word process again, that it is so important. And I think again, of course, that brings me back to play, because when young children are playing and you can see the wonderment, and I love that state of wonder that children can bring us adults into and teach us. We can learn so much for them. I think children get there a lot quicker than us when it comes to, that idea that words are born, they're created, but children get there quicker because play will get you there much quicker than spoken words will. And in the wonderment, you can see that even if they're stacking blocks, that they're going, oh, but I wonder if I did this, or I wonder, could I do that? And in that wonderment is that creativity, and that meaning expands. And, if ever you think, gosh, I haven't played in years, or that's not part of my world, just, allow yourself the opportunity to observe in a non-creepy, safe way, children at play. If you have friends with children, family with children, if you're out and about in a park, children playing is absolutely wonderment in action. And I think we could all do with that. I think we're searching for it. I think it comes out in are we cutting up for poetry? Are we painting? Are we knitting? What is it? We're baking. We're searching for something that gives us that sense of wonderment.
Yeah, that's what I think our adult world is missing a lot, is that sense of wonder.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We got so fact-based, we got so cognitive and so up in our heads, and real news versus fake news versus, and we forgot actually that wondering, playing, creating and being, that's what enables us to function and thrive in the world, and within ourselves before we can do it in the world. And I think we forget that. We're always thinking and drawn to, how are people experiencing me, and what do people think about me, and it's this external validation, and we forgot, well, what am I thinking about me, and how am I feeling about me? And I think play can bring us back there. It can bring us back to that internal sense of wonderment.
Absolutely. And what are your 3 books about? Like, what are the 3 in the series?
Well, so it's 15-minute parenting. So you can actually see, I realized, because that was not for you. I was doing a talk and they're there because actually the third one is in front of me. The blue one is 0 to 7 years. And I really talk about those early years, attachment formation, relationship. There's a lot of, playful parenting, parenting the parent. And it all starts with what I call the parental self-audit, which is that we not only ask, but answer questions of ourselves. What was it like for me growing up, and how does that then influence what I'm doing now? How do I feel about how it was then, and how do I wish it had been? And that question about how do I wish it had been is the starting point for what you're going to now do. The green book is middle childhood, 8 to 12 years. I felt really strongly when writing these books that there would be a dedicated middle childhood space, because I think we do as a society focus on those early all important years, and then we sort of catapult forward to the tricky adolescent years, and we forget that there was this middle childhood phase that was crucial to extracting us from early childhood and actually preparing us for adolescence. And we can often find that some of the misattunement that will play out in adolescence has its roots here in middle childhood. So I really wanted to look at that. And then the third one is my most recent one is this red cover, the teenage years. And that's really about looking at how to stay playful with our teenagers and to use play as a form of creative communication to strengthen and enhance not only our relationships, but also our teens' capacity for emotional fluency and expression. So the books are a play roadmap, really. It's about, play for this and play for that and play and lots of activities, but they're embedded in accessible theory about why. So with 15-minute parenting, then I started doing the podcast. Each episode is only 15 minutes. And I take like a common parenting, sometimes they're questions people send me on social media, sometimes they're things I just come up a lot, and I talk about problem, here's what's going on there, and here's a little creative solution or approach to take with this. And so that was just something I literally started that during the pandemic, speaking into a cardboard box with a blanket over my head for the echo. So like literally me in a box, head in a box, talking about 15-minute parenting. And then I realized, yeah, I should go to a recording studio, maybe somewhere that it's a little bit more professional sounding and consistent sound. So I'm recording in a podcast studio actually now, but it's only 15-minute episodes. And that's really what I'm doing. And looking at the next book in 15-minute parenting as well will be really about parenting the parent and looking at this therapeutic parenting. I'm really interested in the intergenerational stories we tell ourselves, our family narratives. That really interests me. And can we change the stories that we live by? And if we can, and it has to be in an authentic and meaningful way, of course, but how powerful could that be for taking charge of how we live our lives and not following a trajectory that we're carrying forward from 3 generations, but can we actually understand and make meaning of our family narrative as we know it, and then change the stories we live by? That really intrigues me.
And I think that's really important, and that's what I keep thinking of this moment as having a lot of that kind of essence in it, of people like realizing not only their individual histories, but their family histories, like their specific ancestry, but then also like the collective of like the country they live in, or like the
Yeah.
stories we tell ourselves as like a global community. And where it seems like we're all kind of starting to look at that and maybe trying to rewrite them a bit, or not rewrite them like right over them, but like work with them in a different way instead of
Yeah.
just letting it control us and like keep enacting and interacting in the same kind of repetitive ways over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really powerful, and I think it's really important that we do deepen our understanding of our family narrative, because it's part of who we are. It's, those kind of projections, injunctions, counter injunctions that were put into us by our parents as a result of what was put into them by their parents, that is in large part who and how we are. But that doesn't mean that limits us. That should inform us but not limit us. And I think sometimes our family narrative can limit us and restrict us, and we think, well, this is how it's always been. And I'm going, okay, that may be true, that may be the truth, this is how it has always been thus far, but that doesn't mean it can't change now. And yeah, I think really inserting ourselves, and particularly our desire. And, I think, again, when it comes for me to thinking about our desire, what we want and where we want to go, that's also so closely aligned with play and playfulness, because one of the biggest challenges to our emerging desire for our children, but even any of us, to be honest, is that we're losing that capacity for boredom, you know? And I think out of boredom emerges creativity and desire. That if you sit in a state of boredom, I don't see it as that negative thing that, oh, oh, I'm so bored. I think, great, you're bored. What are you going to do? That's so exciting, because in that free floating state of mind, something will emerge. I will find something to do. I will be, you know, motivated to act, to mobilize. And that's going to be underpinned by my desire. And that's so important, that I have those experiences in childhood and adolescence, so that as an adult, I know how to act and how to pursue desire in a healthy way. And actually, I think we've all gotten a bit flat. I think we in this kind of never ending stream of information that's out there, that we don't have that time to be bored anymore. And I think it's a huge loss. I think it's a huge threat to us as people, as society, our culture. And so that'd be my one wish, I think, for everybody out of this pandemic, is embrace a bit of boredom going forward.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about that too, and like how I notice with like kind of younger people that I see is that they just like always have the computer or the phone or
Mm,
whatever on. So it's like this passive engagement of like passively accepting just information that's coming
yeah,
by. And it seems like they've kind of lost this like agency to like create something or go and do something that they choose, because they're just kind of always like passively consuming. So I've
yeah,
started kind of thinking of that, like even in myself, like when the pandemic started and I was home more, like, oh, I've just watched Netflix or whatever. And I felt like I realized I got to a point where I needed to like actively start engaging myself and like not just be passively consuming, but making sure
exactly.
I'm like actively creating and actively engaging the world.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And, it's so easy to kind of sit back, isn't it? And just because there's so much there, like you will literally never watch the amount of TV that's available. So there's always a sense of more, more, more. What's next? What's next? I don't have to wait a week for an episode. I can watch the entire series. It's this binge idea. And, I just think, a bit like you, I definitely did the whole, too much TV. And, it's certainly of the bubblegum for the brain variety. And it got to a stage where I was like, I need to read a book. It doesn't have to be an intense or demanding, it's just any book that is paper and ink on paper. I need to be holding a book and reading a book. I need something different to look at. And, being able to recognize that, or I need to get out, and challenging myself, when I'm going somewhere, not to use my phone as a distraction prop, not to sabotage the opportunity for boredom with distraction, the distraction that's always at our fingertips and in our pockets or bags, but to just sit and look out the window and look around and observe and take in, and to measure, how do I feel after that journey versus navel gazing into a device on my lap. And yeah, it's definitely, you get that opportunity for connection. You make eye contact with someone, you share a smile, there's an exchange, there's a connection. And that's a moment that would be missed if I was staring into a device. And I'm not against phones or technology or social media or any of that, but I just think it can be a very important part of our lives, so long as we don't allow it consume our lives.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just like being more aware of it and kind of having boundaries around it and using it as a good tool that it can be, but not just kind of letting it turn us all into these like sort of passive
Yeah.
zombies.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And at least critically analyzing what we're receiving. And you can only do that if you pause, move away, and think, well, what was that about? And what do I think and feel? Not rush online to go, what does everybody else think and feel? And I will think and feel what they think and feel. Because again, that's suppressing our desire. And I think that comes at a huge cost to us in our relationships, in our mental health, in how we live and function. I think we have to get back to basics, back to desire.
Yeah, and that's another thing I've started doing, like the days I don't have analysis, like on Fridays and Saturdays. I just keep the computer and the phone off, and I just tell my
Yeah.
parents that my parents are really the only people I talk to besides my analysis. And so I just tell them like I don't have any analysis. I'm not gonna be on for the next couple of days. So if you call, I'm not answering. That's why. And now they get it. Now that it's like been a
Yeah.
habit, and yeah, if I do constantly find myself wanting to look at something and I'm like, well, instead of scrolling through my phone, I'm gonna look at a book or go for a
Mm-hmm.
walk or clean the house or like just like be
Yeah.
in my environment.
Yeah. And I love that you could put that boundary and create that, manage the expectation that, if you can't get me, it's not that something awful has happened. It's that I'm not answering the phone and I'm consciously doing it. And I think that's so important that, our capacity for delayed gratification has been completely short circuited by the advances in technology that, you know, immediately respond to me. I get this when someone sends me an email and then maybe a day later say, did you get my email? I'm like, yes, but it was yesterday. So I haven't had a chance to respond yet. But that demand that we do immediately respond, and a text comes in and you respond and you respond and you respond. And it keeps us constantly in this reactive way of being, and actually being able to say, I won't be touching my phone or answering messages or engaging for a day or two because that's what I'm doing, is really empowering.
Yeah, I've loved it. And then it's made the days that I do have my computer and my phone available, it's made me much less like addicted to it basically. It's like
Yeah.
it's made it much easier just to like be doing other things and then just go over to it once in a while instead of like constantly looking at it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, that can feel, and, you can restrict apps on your phone, and there's nothing more humbling than, every time you keep checking and it tells you, no, you've run out of time. And you're like, oh my gosh, what was I doing with all of that time? Because it's quite mindless. You hit it and go, why was I even looking? To let that, those messages, those notifications, they'll still be there tomorrow.
Mm.
And we don't need to know everything now, and we don't need to respond to everything and to everyone now. If ever, we don't have to respond to people at all if you don't want to. And particularly on when we're thinking about social media, and that demand for response is often from people you don't know, that actually you don't have to. You can put a boundary in place and say, no, I choose not to engage with somebody I don't know. I choose not to engage in something that's feeling quite antagonistic. I choose no, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's amazing how hard it is to do that sometimes.
So hard.
It's amazing because it's like really like I don't know this person. I don't owe them
Yeah.
anything. Like why do I feel like I need to respond or like defend myself or whatever?
And I think some of it is we want to convince this person that the version of us they have in mind is not who we are. Let me show you who I am. Let me tell you who I am. And that's our need to be known, to be understood, to get gotten by somebody else. And we can forget that the person on the other end of some other device, they don't care. They have their version of you, and they're going to hammer you over the head with that version until you begin to question who you are, not the other way around. So the best thing we could do is say, I can't control the version of you, of me you've created, but I can hold on to who I am to me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. The other thing I wanted to bring up, which is kind of going back to something we were talking before, but since you're a child family analyst expert, one of the things that I found the most powerful in my own analysis, my own first analysis, I've had three, in my first analysis, was this idea that I wish more people understood kind of more broadly and culturally, that like if you've had something as a parent, if you've had something kind of traumatic happen to you at a certain age in your own childhood, that when your child becomes that age, it's so important to kind of be aware of that, because some things might be kind of coming up or enacted when your child hits the age that you were when you had a traumatic event happen.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's so loaded, what you've just said there. And I think, I often hold in mind that the best way to understand our own unresolved issues is to become a parent. That becoming a parent will bring our stuff we didn't even know we had put into little boxes, hammer the lid shut, and stored deep in our unconscious, that we didn't even know we had, screaming to the surface, because our children are of us. They are separate, subjective little beings, but they are of us. And we will see parts of ourselves, we will see parts of other people, other relationships we've had replayed back and forth with our children. And I think that that's something that we have to give ourselves more kindness about, actually. That, I often say, meet with parents and they say, and recently something came up on the radio show about a parent who said, the only one who needs a timeout in my house is me. I'm having, parental tantrums. Never mind the children. So what will I do with myself? And it was one of the most responded to questions I've answered. I still get messages from people months later saying, I think that's me too, and me too. And I'm going, because that's all of us. By the time we flip our lids and yell at our children or act against our children, it's actually not because of what they've done or said. It is very much what got activated in us by them doing and saying it. That's about us. That is about where else in my life does that feeling belong? Who else spoke to me like that? Who else made me feel like that? Where does that feeling have its roots? Because if I can go there, then how I respond will change. It will change. And that isn't about bringing your child and saying, my child is really tricky, they're really cheeky, they don't listen, fix the child. That is about, let's look at how this child is affecting you and why that is. And I think that that's something that we owe ourselves. And again, that's the root of the parental self-audit, is that you will get to a point of saying, okay, I've reached a block. I need to go somewhere. And I'm really clear with people that sometimes we need a witness, don't we? We need somebody who can guide us through that exploration and that piece of reflection. But how we were parent, I think the transition from being the child of a parent to the parent of a child is immense. I would go further and say transitioning from the daughter of a mother to the mother of a daughter is immense with bells on. And I think there's so much in that we do need to think about. And again, it's not about blaming, although there is kind of a nice way of going, oh, great, there's always someone else to blame for what goes wrong here. Super, I can totally do that. But actually, it's not about that. It's about saying, if I can have that impact, if by shining a light inwards and taking that mnemic memory trace, scattered through our unconscious and interweaving it with a narrative so that it becomes a conscious awareness I now have, that's an immense investment in not only you, but in your child, in your parenting, and in your future relationship. You can change the generations coming after you by doing that. That's always worth doing. So I would feel very strongly that, anything to do with analysis of children involves analysis with parents. I think that that's really important. Anytime you start talking about a child, you end up talking about a parent, don't you? That's again the Winnicott thing. There's no such thing as a baby, because when you talk about a baby, you end up talking about a parent. So that we have to look at that relationship. We have to look at what gets activated in us. And, when we think about transference and countertransference in the analysis, often we're asking ourselves, who am I for this Annalise and who are they for me? I would even take some of that to your parent-child relating, because it's going to be different with each of your children. If you've got 3 or 4 children, actually you do feel different. You're a different parent. If I was to take your 3 or 4 children and ask them to describe you, they would describe different mothers or different fathers. They would describe different parents. And I think that's really important, because who am I for my child want to be, and who are they for me, is really, really important.
That's beautifully put. Was there anything that you wanted to be sure to mention that we didn't get to? Anything you have coming up or anything
No,
like that?
I think we covered so much there. We covered everything. I do share things that I'm doing on social media, so I certainly, if anyone is interested, they'll find me there. Just put in Joanna Fortune and you'll find me. But any talks or things that I'm doing coming up. But no, we actually covered so much ground, which I knew we would, but actually we really did cover even more than I expected, which was lovely. And it just felt like such a nice, comfortable chat, Vanessa. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think, like I said, it's best to just kind of go with the associations, because like if you have a bunch of pre-planned questions ahead of time, then it's like I have only looked at like what you've been doing and I would keep coming back to that, and we might miss all of these other things in the middle.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I actually much prefer this style of just, let's see what comes up. Let's see what's relevant.
Yeah, exactly. What do our unconsciouses want to talk about?
Exactly.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Joanna Fortune. For more, visit her website, solamh.com, and check out her books, 15-Minute Parenting, her podcast, radio show, and news column. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Trapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. A vehicle who comprehended the key, which means mental, is from the accumulation of energy that must have met some previous, outrageous though it is, usually showed enter it up. Expert on new fluid, find out meditational and focus. I was just mantric techniques. This is Austin Osman, partly I was scared development that somebody of an I confessed. My 15 years of service, small town to the corporation, and by I may justifiably say I have never before tally so charged residual secretions form the direct and vaginal they desire never of the ideal true for the and thought also of making a highly visually stones were arriving creativity for many spheres of an election where the previous and the decadent until it runs out literary of change and literal coexisted. When I die, moving faster here than we anticipated, maybe someone will try to procedural exception. One college setting to another. The trial was and among divisions within each attorneys college asked for this variation indicates we think that separate long norms then cut off the commonly should be established. The anthology I was struck by was accessible. Their treasures to be stored. How direct in the people of good as about to deal believe with poetry that a miracle would save them. Try and succeed.